Hey guys, welcome back to Pro Tools 101. Last week, we took a look at our scrolling options in a little bit more detail. Just to do a quick recap, we have four choices when it comes to our edit window scrolling options, which is obviously under the options menu. We have no scrolling, we have page, we have after playback, and we have continuous. No scrolling means Pro Tools is not going to do anything for you. It's not going to automatically update anything that you see on your screen, which means if you want to see what part of your timeline is playing, you will have to manually scroll to that particular part, which is the default and which is what many people prefer. Because when I am editing one part of my audio, I don't want Pro Tools to automatically change what I am seeing on my screen as I'm performing an operation in one part of the screen. The second most popular choice is page, which means when my playback cursor reaches the end of the screen, Pro Tools will automatically update my edit window to show me the next set of audio that is on my track. So my playback cursor will always be visible to me at all times. When it reaches the end, it will automatically update and start from the beginning again. The third is after playback, which means as Pro Tools is playing back, when I press the stop key, Pro Tools will show me where it actually stopped. The part where it stops becomes the center of my edit window. It does not put my edit cursor at that point, but it just moves my timeline so that the location where I actually stop playback will be the center of my edit screen. And the fourth is the continuous mode that we have, in which where our playback cursor remains stationary right in the middle of our edit window, and all our tracks move from the right to the left. So four different choices that we have. We also saw how to enable or disable the loop playback option that we have. If you have a selection and you want to play that back in a loop, the easiest way to do it is to just control and click on the play button in your transport window, and that will enable loop playback. You could obviously go up to the options menu and enable loop playback from there as well, or use a keyboard shortcut which is Command-Shift-L, or if you're a Windows user, it's Control-Shift-L. The most important thing to remember in that is if you wish to loop playback any piece of audio or any piece of your timeline, your selection that you make has to be at least half a second long. If it's anything lesser than half a second, which is 500 milliseconds, it is not going to loop playback. Pro Tools will play it back once and it will stop. If you want it to loop, your selection has to be more than half a second. We took a look at our edit modes in a little bit more detail. We have seen them before, the shuffle mode, slip mode, spot mode, and the grid mode. But we saw two new types of grid mode. We understood what the absolute grid is, which is what we've been using till now. But we also saw what relative grid is, which means if I have an audio clip that is slightly off the grid, when I try to move that audio clip and I'm in my relative grid mode, it will maintain that distance between the grid line and the start of the clip at all times. This is particularly useful when you are trying to move or when you're trying to edit audio which has been, intentionally recorded off beat. So it's actually off the grid, but at the same time, you still want to be able to maintain its position when you perform an edit or when you perform a moving of that particular clip. Right? So technically we don't have four, we have five edit modes. We have the shuffle mode, the slip mode, the spot mode, absolute grid, and the relative grid. You could enable or disable your absolute grid and relative grid by using the same shortcut, which is the F4 key on your keyboard. It will, toggle between either one of them at all times. By default, it will be the absolute grid that you will be using when you launch Pro Tools and create a new session. We also saw how we can change our grid size with the grid setting that is there in our edit window toolbar. We could choose our grid size to follow a completely different timescale or follow the main timescale. So if my main timescale is set to bars and beats, I could tell my grid to always follow what my main timescale is, or I could choose it to be something completely different. So if I wanted to actually see my grid lines in minutes and seconds, but my main ruler is actually set to bars and beats, you could do that if you want. We also saw how you can actually change the resolution of your grid. That means I can have more lines or less lines by increasing or decreasing the value within the grid value selector in the edit window toolbar. Right under the grid value selector that we have, we also saw the nudge value selector. If you don't remember, the nudge is where you can actually make a selection in time or audio and then use keyboard shortcuts to actually move the audio to the left or to the right. We could use the minus and plus key on the number keypad in order to move the audio before or later in time. Or if you don't have the full-size keyboard, you can use a greater than sign or the lesser than sign keys in order to move the audio to the left or to the right, or move your selection to the left or to the right. If you can't see your grid lines when you're working in Pro Tools, make sure the grid button is on, the grid icon or the grid light is actually highlighted in the grid value selector. That's actually what turns the lines on and off, right? And it's easy to miss that. It's pretty small. And lastly, we also saw everything about fades, how you can actually create them using your smart tool, using the shortcuts, or using the fade dialog box itself, right? Fade in, fade out, crossfades, simple stuff, good stuff. Today, we're going to move on to the final chapter in our book. We're going to talk about mixing. Up until now, we have focused on getting various types of signals and media into Pro Tools. So it's now time to look at what we can do with our elements within the DAW. How do we create a good balance? How do we add emphasis where it's needed? How can we tweak the sound to get our desired professional sounding results? Adjusting your levels, adding signal processing, that is using plugins, and creating dynamic automation are what it takes to achieve this. Once our mix sounds the way we want it, we need to output the final finished result as a file, which is what we call a bounce. So that's what we are aiming for by the end of this lesson. Let's start first, though, with some basic mixer terminologies. First off, what is a mixer? A mixer is a gadget whose primary job is to route audio signals. It has an input section through which it accepts incoming signals and an output section through which it outputs the mixed or the combined signals. Before it outputs the signal, though, it can do things to the signal. It allows you to change or process the various signals that are coming into it in different ways. Pro Tools uses the same working method as these conventional audio mixers. Like the mixer, Pro Tools has an input section from where an audio signal comes in to the mixer. And like the mixer, Pro Tools has an output section from where the audio signal leaves the system. The inputs and outputs available to Pro Tools depend on the hardware interface we are using. So if we were using a 4 input to output interface, we shall see 4 inputs available to us in the input section and 2 outputs available to us in the output section. My system has no external interface connected at this time, which means I see my built-in microphone as the only available input and my laptop speakers as the only available outputs. So I have 1 input and 2 outputs. If I had any other interface connected and my playback engine was set to that, I would see different options over here. Of course, if I already have audio on my track, this input setting is irrelevant. It only matters when I'm recording, because I would need to select the source for this track from here. So this input and output section allows me to define where each track is getting its signal from and where each track's signal is going to. The output can also be set to a bus, which means if I wish to route my audio internally inside Pro Tools to another track instead of my hardware, I can choose to do that as well. Conventional mixers have a feature known as a channel insert, which is basically a patch point that allows you to add a signal processor directly into the path of the audio on that channel. In Pro Tools, the insert section is what allows us to achieve this. The inserts is where we can tell Pro Tools to modify the audio on the track with a certain processor, like an EQ or a compressor. Any processor that is used as an insert modifies the entire audio signal on that channel. To insert a processor into a track, click on one of the available insert slots and select the processor of your choice. Let's try putting on an EQ. So I'm going to come up to my insert section here. I'm going to go to plugin, go to EQ, and let's go with the EQ3 7-band plugin. Now I have an EQ inserted on this audio channel, which means any audio that I play back from this channel is going to be processed by this EQ plugin. It will get changed, the EQ plugin will modify the sound that's going to come out, right? Let's solo this track so that we can hear it clearly. And I'm just going to play back just to see what's on this track.
Waiting out in the parking lot after you get off your shift.
All right. Let's say I want to make it sound like a telephone. So I'm going to do a complete low cut and a complete high cut just to give it a telephonic effect, right? So I come here, I enable my high pass filter and enable my low pass filter, change the bandwidth of my high pass, and I cut off everything up to like 1K nearly. Change the bandwidth of my low pass, and I bring it all the way down to around 3K. Yeah, that should be good. Now let's play this back.
Waiting out in the parking lot after you get off your shift.
Cool. So as we see over here, the processor that I used as an insert has modified the entire signal that's coming out from this track. I can't hear the original vocals anymore. I hear only the sound that is coming out from this EQ plugin. If I want to hear the original signal, I can bypass my plugin by turning on the bypass button here and then pressing play again.
Waiting out in the parking lot after you get off your shift.
Right? And if I want to unbypass a plugin, I can just turn this off and now my EQ has its effect again. That's what an insert does. Any plugin that you use as an insert is going to modify the original signal itself, which is what we want when we are using a plugin like an EQ or when I use a plugin like a compressor, right? The Avid EQ3 is one of the plugins that come free with Pro Tools, and it's actually quite a good plugin. It's a 7-band plugin. That's why we had the option of EQ3 7-band or EQ3 1-band. 7-band means I can apply my EQ in 7 different ways. I have 2 filters, a high-pass filter, a low-pass filter, and in the bottom row, I can see I have 5 different bands as well. I have the low frequencies, the low mid frequencies, my mid frequencies, high mid frequencies, and the high frequencies. For each of these bands, I can adjust my bandwidth, which is the Q. I can adjust the frequency, and I can adjust the gain for that particular band itself. I can turn on or off a particular band by clicking on the in button that we have over here, which is how I turned on the 2 filters for my high pass and low pass. Or if I want, I could just use these colored dots and move them around to get a visual representation of the EQ. Right? So if I wanted to reduce my high frequencies, I can come over here and you can actually see the changes happening in the band, in the knobs of the band when I move my mouse with the dot over here itself, right? If I wanted to bypass or if I did not want any of these bands, I can just turn them off by clicking on the in button and turning the light off, and that particular band is no longer applied to my to the EQ itself. So like the EQ, I can have a compressor as well. So if I wanted to change this plugin from an EQ to a compressor, I can either do it from here by selecting a different plugin. I want to go with the Dynamics 3. So I come to Dynamics and I'm going to find the Dynamic 3 compressor. There we go. So this is my Dynamics 3 plugin, also something that comes with Pro Tools for free, right? From here, you can apply your compression settings, or you could use a preset as well. So if I wanted to apply a vocal compression, I could do that from here. And again, let's just play it back to see what it sounds like.
Waiting out in the parking lot after you get off your shift.
If I want to bypass the plugin, just to compare the two, I'm going to bypass it as it's playing so that you can actually hear the change as well. So I'm going to play, and after the first line, I'll turn it off.
Waiting out in the parking lot after you get off your shift.
Right? You can choose any of the settings. You can choose any of the parameters that you want within your compression settings right over here. Pro Tools also gives you a third plugin, also made by Avid, and that is called Channel Strip. The Channel Strip is a really cool plugin which actually combines the functionality of an EQ and a compressor. That means your dynamics and EQs together as one plugin. Again, we can change the plugin from here itself by clicking on this section here, going to plugins and selecting Channel Strip. And here I can see the top part is my dynamic section and my lower part is my EQ section. So like I did with the EQ3, I can just use my mouse to move any of these dots to change the EQ the way I want it to be. And I can apply compression settings directly over here. I can choose between the different bands that I have. So this is my low frequency, my low mid frequency, my high mid frequency, and my high frequency. Or I can apply filters as well. So I have two filters over here, filter 1 and filter 2. So I can have my low pass and high pass set over here as well. The settings in between over here allow me to change my compression settings that I want. Or if I wanted to apply an expander or a gate, I can come to this tab over here and then apply those settings as well. To take out a plugin from Pro Tools, all you need to do is come to the Insert section, click on the dot just before the name, and then say No Insert, and the plugin is gone from that particular insert. Right? Pro Tools allows you to have 10 inserts per track. By default, it's showing you only 5. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over here. But so if I wanted to see my remaining 5, all you need to do is come up to the View menu. I want to see it in my mix window, so I go to Mix Window Views, and over here I can choose to enable inserts F to J. So A to E is my first 5 inserts, and F to J is my 6 to 10, or the next 5 inserts. So when I turn this on, now I can see my 10 inserts in my mix window. Obviously, not everyone uses 10 inserts at a time, which is why it's not something that's visible by default. So if you don't want to see it, you can turn it off by coming to the View, Mix Window Views, and turning off F to J. Sometimes we do not wish to process our original audio with an effect, and instead would like to make a copy of it for parallel processing. Maybe we have an external reverb unit that we would like our audio to be processed with, or perhaps a different plugin itself. Processors that allow you to modify the timing of your audio signal, like delays and reverbs, are usually processed parallelly, which means they aren't inserted into the audio track directly. Because if done so, it would be difficult to control the output of that track, as the output would have that time-delayed effect throughout. Usually, reverbs and delays are processed separately so that we can adjust their levels independently to the original signal. So when the intention is to use such an effect, we need to make a copy of our original signal so that it can be processed with this effect separately. Let's actually take a look at what happens if we insert our reverb into an audio track. So I'm going to come back to my insert section over here, and I'm going to select a reverb to insert. Let's just go with reverb 1. And I'm going to choose a big room. Let's go with the cathedral just to see what it sounds like. Now I'm going to bypass the plugin first just to make you remember what the original audio sounds like. This is what that sounds like.
Waiting out in the parking lot after you get off your shift.
Cool. And I'm now going to unbypass the reverb plugin. So now whatever you hear is going to be the output of this reverb plugin. Right? Not something we want. This is not how we want to use reverb. I can hear the person's sound completely time modified. I can hear that he is inside the cathedral in this case. And I can hear the effect, but I can't hear the original sound. Which is why when I use a time-based processor or a time-modifying processor, I should not use it as an insert on an audio track. Of course, you can use it if you're trying to create an effect. In sound design, we do it all the time. But in terms of regular audio mixing, it's not something that is done unless you're trying to create a different kind of effect. So if I wanted to use a reverb, how do I do it? How can I apply my reverb to my audio track? How can I get reverb for my vocal track that I have over here? This is when the send section is used. On a conventional mixer, when using a send for external processing, the signal is routed out of the mixer through an external device where some type of processing is added, and then returned to the mixer through an auxiliary input, sometimes known as an auxiliary return. Pro Tools mimics this signal flow internally as well. So when using a send for internal processing, effects are added using a plugin applied to the returned signal on the destination track, which would be an aux input track in Pro Tools. So if I wish to create a copy of this channel's audio for parallel processing, this is how I would do that. I'm going to create a new track. I'm going to say I want a stereo aux input. I'm going to rename this track over here itself. I'm going to call this reverb. I'm going to say create. And now I have a reverb track next to my vocal track itself over here. Right? Let's go ahead and take out this reverb plugin from this track because this is not how I want to use it. And I want to send my audio from this track to this track, which is where I apply a send. I don't change the output of the track because if I change the output of the track, you're sending the entire signal to another destination. I want to make a copy of the signal so that I can listen to my original audio signal and I can listen to the reverb or whatever processing that I do to the copy of the original signal that I have. So I come up to my send and I tell Pro Tools I want you to send a copy of this audio track onto a bus. I'm going to go to bus 1, 2, and now my audio is going to go on to bus 1, 2 as well as my main output, which means now when I press play, my sound is going not only coming out from out 1, 2 because my track's output is set to 1, 2, but it's also going to bus 1, 2. But where is bus 1, 2 going? Well, as of now, it's not going anywhere. I need to tell bus 1, 2 to go to a particular track so that I can put my reverb on that particular track, which is where the aux input comes in. My auxiliary track comes in. So I come to the input section of my aux track and I make the input of my aux track bus 1, 2. So now the signal that is going on bus 1, 2 is going to come on my aux track as well because my aux track's input is set to bus 1, 2. If I wanted to apply a reverb now to my audio signal, all I need to do is come up to my insert section in my audio track, in my aux track, and then go to reverb and apply the same reverb that I wanted. So let's go back and apply the same cathedral sound that I have over here. And I'm going to close this window, solo my aux track so that I can actually listen to the reverb as well. I've soloed my vocal track, that's why. And I'm going to hit play. But before I hit play, I want you to keep in mind that a fader has actually popped up for me when I enabled bus 1, 2 as a send. This is my send level control. That means I can decide how much of my original audio signal will get processed by the reverb. And that setting is adjusted by this fader that is in this particular popped up window. So as of now, there's going to be no reverb that you will hear from this track. So I'm going to hit play and I'm going to slowly bring up this particular fader that you see over here. And as I bring up the fader, you will hear more and more reverb coming from my aux track. All right, here goes.
Waiting out in the parking lot after you get off your shift. James forgot to pick you up. Now you're asking me for a lift.
Too much? I agree. Let's bring it back down, right? This is what it allows me to do. It allows me to control how much of my audio is going to get processed by the reverb plugin. The aux track also gives me much more control of the signal that's coming out from my reverb plugin as well. While this particular fader allows me to control my send level, but the fader on my aux track allows me to control the return level. That means I'm controlling the final output volume of the reverb plugin through the fader on my aux track. I can also tell Pro Tools to change the type of send depending on the kind of project that you're working on. You see this button over here that says pre? If I turn that on, it makes my send pre-fader. If it's off, which is what the default is, it means my send is post-fader. What does pre-fader and post-fader mean? If I turn it on and I enable pre-fader, what it means is I'm telling Pro Tools to take the level of, to take the signal or to make a copy of the signal before the volume fader of my audio track makes any change to it. Which means even if I reduce the fader on my, the volume fader on my audio track now, it's not going to adjust the level. It's not going to reduce the level of the output of my send output that is going on bus 1 and 2. If it is post fader, that means if it is off, which is what the default is, Pro Tools will take into account the position of the fader of my original audio track itself. Right? So that's what pre-fader and post-fader does. Let's take a listen to see what it sounds like. So I'm going to make it post-fader now, which is what it is by default. And I'm going to hit play. You will notice that because my fader is low, the output of the reverb track is also a little bit low. I'm going to hit play. Right? Even if I increase the fade, if I'm bring the fade send level to unity or 0, it's still going to sound a little less because the original source audio that the send is getting is lesser. It's going to sound a little bit more than what it was sounding before this, but it will still be less. Let's play this back to see what it sounds like. Now I'm going to make it pre-fader, which means when I make it pre-fader, Pro Tools is going to ignore the position of this particular fader on my audio track. That means it doesn't care what the original audio level is. It's just going to take the full signal strength and it's going to push it to the reverb plugin. I'm now going to change my send output level, which means my send output level is actually quite high. So you should be hearing less of the original signal and you're going to be hearing more of the wet signal, or that means more of the reverb from the plugin itself. Let's press play. Do you get it? Right? So that's what pre-fader and post-fader does. Usually, you want your setting to be in post-fader, which is what the default is, because when I reduce the volume of a particular track, I want the reverb level to go down with it. I don't want my reverb level to always be high and my dry signal, which is the original signal, to have an independent control, right? I want to be able to control the ratio, which is why I'm using an aux track and putting my reverb plugin on an aux track. That is so that I can control the final output of the reverb plugin itself. But I still want it to be linked so that when I reduce my original volume signal, my reverb comes down with it. Why do I have the setting for pre-fader then? We use it in sound design. When you're working in films, when you're trying to create a special kind of sound effect where you want to hear the reverb more than the original signal sometimes, that's when the pre-fader setting is used. So you will get to use it very soon when we do audio post-production together, quite a bit. But for music production, usually we leave it in post. So just leave it at post fader, and whatever level your fader is set to over here, it will follow, your send level will follow the fader level that is set by the track itself, right? So this is how we create a send in Pro Tools. Again, Pro Tools has 10 sends, and by default it shows you only A to E, which is 5. So if you wanted to turn on the remaining sends, I come to View, I go to Mix Window Views, and I can enable sends F to J over here, where Pro Tools will show me the remaining 5 sends that I have, right? So it's optional. You can customize your Mix Window View to whatever you want it to be. The pan pots allow you to position your track signal within the stereo field, and the faders allow you to set the volume of each track's signal in your stereo mix. You can customize what you see in this window from the View menu at any time. Now let's talk about plugins. Pro Tools has two main categories of plugins: real-time processing plugins and file-based processing plugins. The format of plugins that Pro Tools uses is called AAX. Other DAWs have other formats, like Logic uses the AU or audio units format. Cubase uses the VST format. AAX plugins can be processed natively or via DSP, which means they can be used on your computer's CPU or via the chips on the HDX cards. Some AAX plugins are native only, while some are DSP only. It's not necessary that every AAX plugin out there is available in both forms. Some manufacturers don't make DSP plugins, they make only native plugins. Some plugins can't be used in DSP mode because of the latency, and it has to be used in native mode only. When we select a plugin to insert on a track, Pro Tools processes our signal with this plugin in real time, which means the plugin is working its magic only when Pro Tools is playing. If the session is not playing, the plugin is not doing anything. That's what real time means. When you insert a plugin on a mono track, Pro Tools shows you a list of all the plugins you can use in real time that are installed on your system. But if you go to insert a plugin on a multi-channel track, Pro Tools offers you a choice of inserting a multi-channel plugin or a multi-mono plugin. The difference between these is the way Pro Tools processes the audio of each channel. With a multi-channel plugin, Pro Tools will process both the channels of audio together as one. So whatever setting you apply gets applied to both the channels of audio on that track. I'm saying both assuming you're using a stereo track. If it's more than stereo, then that many channels, right? A multi-mono plugin, on the other hand, gives you the ability to have a different setting for each channel. So if I'm using an EQ on this stereo track, I can have one type of EQ for the left channel and one type of EQ, a completely different type of EQ, for the right channel, which is quite cool. But generally, you would want to just opt for the multi-channel version of the plugin. We very rarely do we actually want different EQs on different channels, especially on a stereo recording, right? With the processing in place on your tracks, it's time to focus on levels and panning in your mix. For a simple mix, you can often set the volume faders and pan controls as desired and leave them unchanged throughout your mix. But for a more complex mix that requires dynamic changes, you can use track automation. Pro Tools allows you to record any real-time changes you make as automation on your tracks. You can automate controls like the volume, pan, mute, send levels, and many more. Tracks in Pro Tools use automation modes to determine how automation features work on the track. You can set the automation mode for each track independently. Let's take a look at the three basic automation modes: read, write, and off, to illustrate real-time automation in Pro Tools. But before we start this, we should tell Pro Tools what kind of parameters we wish to use for our automation. And this is a global setting, which means it applies to all tracks. So, from our window menu, let's open up the automation window. Here, we can enable the parameters that we wish to automate on our tracks, which means if I wish to record volume automation, my volume button should be on. Similarly, if I wish to automate my sends volume, I could enable that as well. This window can get a little confusing because usually red means off or red means not good, but in this particular window, red actually means on. I'm not sure why they didn't go with green, and green would have been probably my choice, but that it may be a design thing or maybe something that they felt would have a better impact. So red means on and gray means off in this particular window, right? So if you wanted to automate your pans, you would have to click on the pan button and make sure it is red in color. Because if it's not on, then whatever changes you make to the pan pots or as Pro Tools is playing, Pro Tools will not remember these changes in real time. It will remember the start or the end position, that's it, but that will be the fixed position. If you want the position to change as Pro Tools is playing back, then you need to enable the automation for that particular parameter itself. Right? We can use a shortcut to actually bring up this window, and the shortcut is Command 4 on our number keypad. So if you press Command 4, it's going to pop up, and Command 4 to turn it off again as well. Right, so now I have enabled my volume automation and my send volume over here. Let's just work with the volume automation for now. Right, I'm going to close this window over here, and let's say I want to write my volume automation. I want to write volume changes to my lead vocal track that I have right at the beginning over here. I need to tell Pro Tools to record my volume information or record my automation on that particular track. So I come to the track itself, and I can see right under my output section, I have something known as auto. This is my automation mode selector. And if I wanted to turn on my automation mode over here for this particular track, if I wanted to change it to write mode, all I need to do is drop this box down and select write. So now any changes that I make to the fader as Pro Tools is playing back, Pro Tools will record those changes for me in real time, right? Let's see how that works. I'm actually going to just take out this reverb for now because I don't want to hear the reverb track as I am recording. All right, so let's get rid of that for now. And I am going to move this fader as Pro Tools is playing back. You do not have to record arm the track, right? Please don't be mistaken. When you record arm the track, that is only if you want to record audio or record a signal into that track itself. In this case, I am not recording a signal, which is why I am not record arming the track. I have only changed my automation mode to write, right? So I'm only going to play back over here. And as I play back, I'm going to move this fader from up to down and back up, right?
Waiting out in the parking lot. You up, now you're asking me for a lift.
Cool. I have recorded my automation now. How do I know what I have recorded? I can't see what I have recorded. You can choose to see what you have recorded actually. So if I come to my edit window and you drop down my track view selector over here where it says waveform as of now, I can tell Pro Tools to show me my volume information. And if I enable that, Pro Tools will show me the changes that I have made to my volume information. So this was the way I actually moved my fader, right? Let's write some more automation from this point over here now to actually see this change happening in real time. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to put myself in the write mode again, and I'm going to press play, and I'm going to move my fader, and this time I'm going to go a couple of times up and down, right? So you can actually see the changes happening in real time onto my automation line, automation graph that is on my waveform. Here we go.
Looks like
You can see the line is actually turned to red, which is actually showing me that it's recording automation at this time.
get you. Now I'm taking you home.
And when you press stop, Pro Tools will stop playing back or recording the automation itself. Once you finish writing your automation, it's always good habit to change your automation mode back to read, because if you are in the write mode, and you touch something else by mistake, or you touch the fader by mistake, or even if you don't touch anything by mistake. Now see what happens if I leave myself in the write mode and I press play. I'm not going to touch the fader now. What do you think is going to happen? Is it going to play back the automation that is already there on the track, or is it going to overwrite the automation that is there on the track? It will overwrite. It will overwrite because I have told Pro Tools I want to record volume information now in my global automation window. So I bring up Command 4. I see my volume is going to be recorded irrespective of what I do, right? So if I press playback now, Pro Tools will assume that the current position of my volume fader is the position that I want to record as my automation level. So when I press play, Pro Tools is just going to start
Looks like
writing the automation,
everyone is
right? And it is
gone.
overwriting,
How long?
and it is overwriting the data that I have already recorded, which is something that I probably wanted. So as soon as you finish recording your automation, let's just undo this for now. As soon as you finish recording your automation, always remember to change your automation mode to read mode. In read mode, Pro Tools is not going to record automation. Pro Tools is going to read the automation that is there on your automation graph as of now, right? So when I press play, you will actually see the fader move in real time within Pro Tools as well. Let's go back to the beginning, and I'm going to press play, and keep your eye on the fader over here. You will see it move in, as the automation graph moves as well.
Waiting out in the parking lot. Pick you up. Now you're asking me for a lift.
Right? If you want Pro Tools to bypass the automation, let's say, the bass guy has come and he needs to record a line, and he says, yeah, just bring down the volume of the vocal. I don't want to listen to the vocal guy. So you want to keep your automation, but you want to temporarily bypass your automation for that particular track so that you can bring the fader down, or just mute it temporarily. You could turn your automation off. And when you turn your automation off and bring your fader all the way down, you will actually, basically Pro Tools is just going to read the level of the fader now, and it's going to ignore any of the automation that is on the track. You see the blue line that's on the track right now? That's basically the fader position. So when I hit play, Pro Tools is not reading the automation level from my automation track right now, right? So once the bass guy has finished recording his guitar line and I want to bring my mix back up, all I need to do is come back to the automation mode selector and tell Pro Tools read, and that's it. And I press play. Pro Tools will
out in the parking lot.
Pro Tools will read the automation data that you have, right? So you can temporarily bypass your automation by changing the mode to off, or you can write automation by changing the mode to write, or read the automation, which is what the default is. Whenever you make any track, the default automation mode is read. So if you want to, Pro Tools to be able to read your automation always, make sure you are in the read mode. Your automation data need not be seen directly on the track itself, which means I can go back and tell my track view selector to show me the waveform. Some people don't like to see it on the waveform. They want to see it under it, which is what you can do. You see this small button that's right at the head of the track over here? This is what actually shows you your automation lanes. So when I click on it, Pro Tools will show me the automation data that is actually recorded. And I can choose what automation data is I want to see. So I can click on this plus sign to show me another automation lane. So if I have more automation written, like I think on this particular track, I have volume and pan automation. That's why the colors are yellow. So when I select my pan automation, it shows me my pan automation data as well over here, right? You can see the pan automation data move, the pan pot move, sorry. So I'm going to play back from over here, and keep your eye on the fader and the pan pot over here, and you will actually see both of them move in real time as it's playing.
Get you. Now I'm taking you home.
Right? I can edit the automation information that I have on my automation lanes as well. So you see this graph that I have drawn using my fader, right? The white lines are basically showing me the changes that are happening on that automation parameter. So all the white dots that you see, not lines, sorry, I meant the dots. The white dots that you see on my volume lane over here, those are the different changes that I have. So I can actually just use my mouse to click, and let's go over here. I can use my mouse to just click and drag to change any of these data informations like this. I can change the data points. If I don't like that data information, I can just hold the Option key and click on them, and it's gone. If I want to put a data point at that particular, it's called an automation breakpoint. If I want to put an automation breakpoint at this particular location, I hold my Command key and I click, and it puts an automation breakpoint, which I can click and drag and position it to anywhere I want, right? On Windows, it's slightly different. Obviously, Command means control. So control click will put your automation breakpoint, and option is alt. So you want to take it out, it's alt and click to take it out, and control and click to create an automation breakpoint. This works only in the grabber tool, and it's working for me because I'm in my smart tool, which is what I usually recommend. But if you are not in your smart tool, you can't use control or command or option to do anything over here. You have to be in your grabber tool in order for it to work. But again, if you're in your smart tool, that means your grabber tool is always active at all times, right? So I just hold control and Pro Tools knows exactly what I want to do. I want to create an automation breakpoint, one more, click, drag, done. If I want to delete multiple automation breakpoints, that's pretty simple too. I can just select all the ones that I don't want and I press delete on my keyboard or backspace on your keyboard if you're on Windows, and Pro Tools will delete all the automation breakpoints that you have for that particular session, for that particular region, right? You can undo automation breakpoints, so I can undo and bring it back if I want. So that is something that is possible in your in recording automation as well, right? So this is how you can dynamically adjust the levels or different things about your mix. Each track can have its own automation data. So if there is a particular, like maybe from bar number 29 to bar number 30, you wanted one particular track to be a little louder, you could do that using automation. For the rest of the song, if you wanted that track to be a little softer, you can do that. You can automate your values. You can actually even use a pencil tool. This is not part of the 101, but I'll just show it you. You can use your pencil tool to go a little crazy and write your automation value as well, right? So this is something that is possible, but obviously it's not recommended. We recommend you use your ear and adjust the volume of whatever you need to by using your ear and understanding how the volume for each track is going to work with the rest of the tracks that you have. But you can record your automation data like that as well. Okay. Once you finish recording your automation, once you finish adjusting your mix and you have everything perfectly sounding, we need to think of backing up our session, right? We need to think of how we can archive our entire session. And this is something that we had spoken of before. Pro Tools gives you an option called Save Copy In, which is a pretty cool way of making an entire archive of your session. So it's in the File menu. So I come up to File and I tell Pro Tools Save Copy In. And this is the window that you get to see in it. We live in a digital age, right? So our data is pretty fragile. A small mishandling of a hard drive can lead to disastrous results. So it's always good practice to make multiple copies. When creating an archive, be sure to include all the media files that are referenced by the session as well. So maybe when you were importing some of your audio or different media, you did not copy the file, you added the file. In which case you want to make sure that Pro Tools, when you make an archive, Pro Tools now makes a copy of all of the files from wherever it is. Maybe you have like 5 different USB hard drives connected to your PC or Mac, and you have one file on each of those hard drives. So the Save Copy In command allows you to consolidate. It allows you to go through each hard drive and make a copy of all the files so that everything is together in one place. It's a way to back up an entire Pro Tools session and all its associated files without leaving the original session. That means you will still be in your session, unlike the Save As command, which we saw last a couple of weeks back. When you do a Save As, Pro Tools shows you the new file instead of the existing file, right? So when I do a Save As version 2, it will show me the version 2 after I finish the Save As command, not the version 1 file. But in Save Copy In, it does not do that. You are still in your existing session. It allows you to make multiple versions of a session at various stages of the project. So maybe you finished your tracking. Okay, you want to make an archive of all your tracking, which is done. Then you go in and you make your edits. You clean up. You add your fade in, fade outs. You want to do another it's like a significant breakpoint in your mixes, right? So the points where you can actually go back to, or you would want to go back to in case of an accident, right? So you can have multiple versions of your sessions at different stages of your project. You can change your sample rate and bit depth. So if you have worked with people who've sent you files in different sample rates and bit depths, and you want to make sure everything is correct and the same, You can tell Pro Tools to change the sample rate and bit depth, or even the file format, like from WAV to AIFF or AIFF to WAV. That's possible as well. You can use this dialog box to even change the version of Pro Tools that you want this session to work with. So maybe you are using Pro Tools 2020 or 2021.3 now that it's there, but you're going to send the project to somebody who's still using Pro Tools 9 or Pro Tools 10. So you want to make sure that your session will be able to open up in their system as well, so you can change the Pro Tools version from this particular dialog box. And you can even convert your session. So if it's a session and you want to convert it to a project, which means you want to store it on the cloud and then enable collaboration, you can do that. Or it's a cloud project, you want to now save it locally as a session, you can do that as well. Right? So these are the different options that you have when you want to use a save copy in. So the most important thing whenever you decide to use a save copy in is to always include audio files. And if you're working on post-production, I would include even the video files. Everything else can be recreated, trust me, but if you do not have your content, that is the most heartbreaking. So make sure your audio and video files are always there, and then everything else is optional. You can work on it. Don't change the bit depth or sample rate. Don't lower it for any reason, and don't make it higher for a stupid reason. It's not going to improve your quality if you change your sample rate or bit depth over here by adding it, by changing the number and going up. You can reduce it if you really don't have the hard disk space and you want to make the session a little smaller. You can reduce your sample rate and your bit depth, and it will end up becoming a little smaller for you. Or maybe you're planning to open it up using an interface that does not support high resolution audio, and you need to do a good quality conversion from a high res to a low res version, then this is your way to do that. All right. Once you do that, just say okay, and Pro Tools will ask you where do you want to save it. Just point it to a location, and Pro Tools will recreate the entire folder for you in that way. Right. And lastly, bouncing. Mixing down is the process of recording the output from multiple tracks to a stereo file. This process is also commonly referred to as bouncing the session in Pro Tools. So mixing down is often the last phase of audio production, most of the time, right? The most commonly used mix down option in Pro Tools is the bounce mix. Or if you're using an older version of Pro Tools, or if you end up working in a studio with an older version of Pro Tools, it's called bounce to disk. But the version that we are using, it's called bounce mix. The command is under the file menu. So let's click on file and go to bounce mix. And this is the window that we get. When performing a bounce with Pro Tools, it's important to recognize that the bounce will capture all audible information in your mix, just as you hear it during playback. So keep a couple of things in mind. Firstly, before you come to this window, before you actually do a bounce mix, make sure you are hearing exactly what you want your final version of your bounce to be. If there's something that cannot be heard by you, chances are that Pro Tools is not going to bounce it, which means if you have a track that's muted, it will not be part of your bounce mix, right? Make sure that you select the right output path. Now, if all of your tracks are playing from output 1 and 2, you have to make sure that your mix source in your bounce mix window is set to output 1 and 2. If it is set to bus 1 and 2, then obviously what you are hearing now and what is on bus 1 and 2 is not the same, so you will not get the same output in your file, right? The bounced file will be a printed version of your session, which means whatever plugins you have, your EQs, your reverbs, everything, you can't change any of these settings for any of these plugins after you have finished your bounce, right? Because once you do a bounce, everything gets combined and everything gets consolidated into one multi-channel file or one file itself. So you can't, it's not a session file, it's going to be a WAV file. So once that WAV file is created, you can't go back and tweak an EQ. You'll have to come back to your Pro Tools session, tweak the EQ, and then do another bounce if that is what you want to do, right? The bounce will be based on your timeline selection as well. So if you have made a selection, like as of now, I have a selection from bar number 13 to bar number 20, roughly around 6 bars. Whatever Pro Tools is going to bounce is going to be only from bar number 13 to bar number 20, which is not something that I want. So be aware of your timeline selection before you do a bounce mix. Don't assume that Pro Tools is just going to bounce the whole song for you. No, Pro Tools will follow your selection. So if you've not made the right starting selection and the ending selection, Pro Tools is not going to give you the right kind of bounce, right? So make sure you choose the right duration to bounce when you do a bounce. If you don't make a selection at all, that means if you go right to the beginning and then do a bounce, then Pro Tools is going to bounce the entire thing for you. But then keep in mind, just in case, you have a file right at the end which you've forgotten about, a clip on a track that you've forgotten about, and maybe it's like 100 bars after the song is actually over, Pro Tools is going to give you 100 bars of silence and then bounce that last piece of audio into the WAV file as well, right? So be aware of what you are bouncing. Make sure you make the selection in the right way. Couple of different things that you can choose over here. Apart from giving it a name, obviously, you can give your file a name over here. You can choose a file type. Your file type can be WAV, it can be AIFF, it can be MP3, or it can be the Material Exchange format or the MXF format. If you're working with video, you will have the option of outputting a QuickTime file as well. So Pro Tools can bounce the audio inside a QuickTime file for you, right? Choose your mix source. Obviously, as I said, if you are outputting everything from output 1 and 2, make sure it is the same as your output 1 and 2. You do have the choice of bouncing multiple outputs. So if you wanted to bounce your bus 1 and 2 and output 1 and 2, you could do that as well. We'll talk about that when we do audio post-production. It's something that is usually used by people who create stems. So you can have different buses being bounced out to different files. So you have your strings as one file, your vocals as one file, your horns as one file, your rhythms as one file. So different files at the same time, right? You can tell Pro Tools to add an MP3 file as you're bouncing. So it's a smaller version of the same file, but do understand MP3 is a lossy compression. That means the quality sucks. So it's not something that you want to use for a release, but yeah, if it's something like a quick reference you want to share with a friend for an opinion, sure, by all means, you can just say add MP3 and now Pro Tools will create two files, a WAV file and an MP3 file at the same time, right? You can choose a file format to be either mono summed, multiple mono, or interleaved. If you're working in a stereo environment, you want the file format to be interleaved. That means you want a stereo file to be two channels inside one file in one WAV file itself. That's what interleaved does. If you choose multiple mono, that means you're going to get your left channel as one WAV file and your right channel as one WAV file. Not something that you want for music. If you choose mono summed, it's going to take the left channel of audio, the right channel of audio. It's going to mix both of them together. It's going to combine them into one channel of mono audio. This is sometimes used in countries where the broadcast still happens in mono. There are some radio stations that broadcast in mono. There are some TV stations that still broadcast in mono as well. But it also gives you a good reference to make sure that it's always good to reference your mix in mono so that you make sure that there's no phasing issues that happen. So when you combine your left and right channel, nothing is getting lost, right? So if you want to do a quick reference, you can bounce a mono sum to see what it sounds like as well. But what we want to do is leave it at interleaved. Your bit depth and your sample rate, go with what your session bit depth and sample rate is. Do not change this unless you are making a CD. If you're making a CD, this is where you tell Pro Tools, okay, I need to change the bit depth and sample rate because the bit depth and sample rate of a CD is 44,000 hertz and 16-bit. Right? This is where you tell Pro Tools. But if you are not making a CD and you're just going to do a digital release, I would say leave it at what your sample rate and bit depth is, right? Because the higher the quality is, the better your final output is going to sound, right? So don't reduce the quality if you don't need to. If you are going to be passing this on to a mastering engineer who's going to be doing a little bit of mastering on your final mix, then definitely don't touch it, right? Let him do the final delivery creation for you, right? So leave it as is. You have the option of importing the audio after the bounce. That means after you finish the bounce, you can tell Pro Tools to import the audio back into the session. So it'll give you the choice to put it in a clips list or track or wherever it is. and you can tell Pro Tools where you want the bounce file to be. By default, Pro Tools will always store your files in the bounced file folder inside the session folder, which is what you want it to be, right? But if you want to choose a different location, you can do that as well. And lastly, you can tell Pro Tools to do an offline bounce. So the bounce is not in real time. That means if it's a 4-hour movie that you are bouncing, you don't have to sit and wait for the entire 4 hours. You can do an offline bounce, and Pro Tools will do it in a much faster speed, in a much lesser time, right? So once you select whatever you want, all you need to do is say bounce, and Pro Tools will do the bounce for you. Done. Right? Obviously, my selection was just 6 bars, so it's going to be ridiculously small. There is another bounce method. There's a technique called bounce to tracks, or it's also known as an internal bounce or an internal layback. Bouncing to tracks is essentially the process of recording the session's output back onto a stereo track. So basically what I can do in Pro Tools is I can create a stereo audio track. I can set all my existing tracks to go to one bus, to output to one bus, and I can set the new audio track's input to be that same bus. And then I can press record on the track and record my entire song into Pro Tools itself. That is called internal bounce or bounce to tracks, right? It's not something that is used by everyone, but depending on the situation, depending on the workflow that people are used to, sometimes internal bounces or internal laybacks are done very frequently as well, right? So that is how we do a bounce, and that is how we finish up our work in Pro Tools. We have seen everything that you need to understand the basics concepts of Pro Tools, and I hope these videos are handy to you at all times, at any time in your life, right? If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. You know where to find me, right? Thank you. Bye.